I hope you can see it now.
That's great, yes.
All right. Yeah, so basically I'm just giving a report of what I'm doing so far. So I'm currently looking at aspects of the phonology of Cinyiha in relation to the other languages that I've been studying so far, so Chisukwa, Chindali, and Tumbuka. So I'm looking at Cinyiha, various aspects of phonology, and trying to see its linguistic relationship with these other neighboring neighboring languages. So that's basically what I'm doing at the moment, and I'll just share some of the things that I'm observing so far. So I'll have an introduction, and then I'll give a background of Cinyiha or Cinyiha. Then we'll have a discussion on the sounds, phonological processes, and the relationship with other languages, and then I'll conclude. As I said, the presentation will have the introduction, which will bring in the aim, the research questions that I have, the main arguments that I'm bringing in. I'll also bring in the background of Cinyiha, and there I'll have talk about the number of speakers, areas where it's spoken, several social issues. And then I'll go on to the discussion. As I said, I'll talk about the sounds, phonological processes, and relationship with other languages, and then I'll conclude. So basically the research is on aspects of the phonology of Cinyiha, and I'll be looking at Cinyiha's sound system and selected phonological processes. I'll also look at the relationship of Cinyiha with its neighboring languages. Cinyiha is spoken in Chitipa in northern Malawi, and Chitipa is the most heterogeneous district in the country, in Malawi, with about 7 language groups. So it's a pretty complex area, which brings in interest to see what is happening. And it borders, the district borders with Zambia and Tanzania, and the ancestors of the speakers of the language, and in this case Cinyiha, are reported to have migrated from these 2 neighboring countries. So as you see, the geographical and social linguistic context provides a rich area for examination of contact-induced influences on language and also other aspects of migration. So these are some of the things that I'm trying to look at. So the aim of the study is to examine the phonological aspects of Malawian Cinyiha, some call it Chinyika, and also assess its linguistic positioning with neighboring languages such as Chisukwa, Chindali, Chilambia, and Chitumbuka. So I'll be making references to Chisukwa, Chindali, Chilambia, and sometimes Chitumbuka, because these are the languages that are surrounding Cinyiha. I'll also try to answer questions on migration and language contact, and if they have had a significant impact on the language. Studies on Cinyiha have been done before. Cinyiha, as I said, is spoken in Tanzania too. So we have Asheli 2013, who did a grammatical sketch of the Tanzanian variety. We also have Goodness 2008, who did a study on the noun morphology, and Yukawa 1989 on verb tonology. In Malawi, we have Mtenje 2006, who did some study on vowel sequences of the Malawian variety, and Mtenje-Mkochi forthcoming written something on Cinyiha and the nominal class marking system. So if you look at the map, you see, I'll show you the map later. Cinyiha is in close contact with Chisukwa, Ndali, Lambia, and Chitumbuka. And that's why I'll be referring to these languages in some instances when I'm discussing some of the phonological issues that are within the language Cinyiha. The research questions therefore are, what is the sound system of Cinyiha? Because you see that although I've mentioned the studies that have been done, they are not detailed enough to explain all the most of the phonological processes or most of the phonological aspects of Cinyiha. So I want to study in detail the Malawian variety of Cinyiha, and also the prevalent phonological processes. What are they? What is the relationship between Cinyiha and neighboring languages such as Chisukwa, Chindali, Chilambia, and Chitumbuka? So far what I'm discussing is that Cinyiha shares some sounds and phonological processes, especially with Chilambia in the what do you call this? The abstract. It was written Chindali, but I want actually it was Chilambia with although it has also some aspects that are similar to Chindali and Chisukwa, but mostly it shows a lot of similarities with Chilambia. And this is because of their historical relationship, which I'll talk about later. And Chitumbuka seems to also be contributing something to the phonology of the language. And I'll just talk about that too. The data that was taken for that I'm using here is mostly from a native speaker that is from Tie Maulambia in Chitipa district, and this is the dialect of this person, and also other people who confirmed some of the things in this area. So if this is a language map of Malawi, and you see that Cinyiha is the blue area at the topmost part, as you see. The other part is Zambia, the other part is Tanzania. So that's Chitipa district. So these blue spots here are Cinyiha. So it's a minority language that's spoken in this northern part of Malawi. And it has Guthrie's code M23. In Chitipa district, we have traditional authorities, so it's spoken in Kameme, Maulambia, and Mwenewenya in this district. It's also spoken, as I said, in Tanzania and Zambia. So unlike other Malawian languages like Chitumbuka and Chichewa, which have broader uses, for example, Chichewa is the lingua franca of Malawi. Chitumbuka is the lingua franca of the northern region. Cinyiha is a group language that is just spoken among the Nyiha people. It's not used in the school system, and you not find it in the media. So even if I could go back to the map, if you see that the languages around it, so you have this purple area, which is Chilambia, and then you have this light green part, that's Chisukwa. Then you have the dark green part, that's Chindali. So these are the languages that are surrounding it. Chitumbuka is also there, so these are the languages that are surrounding Cinyiha. So that's in the form of a background. So now I'll start looking at some of the phonological aspects of Cinyiha so that we can have this discussion. So Cinyiha has 5 vowels, so it has a 5-vowel system. And it's a simple vowel system, which is also shared among the neighboring languages that I'm talking about here. So Chitumbuka, Chisukwa, Chindali, and Chilambia also have this 5-vowel system. In terms of consonants, you see that Cinyiha has a variety of consonants from the plosives, nasals, fricatives, laterals, and approximates. All of them are there. So you see that the voicing between consonants, obstruents is there. One crucial difference that I see with the other languages is the absence of the sound ch in Cinyiha, and that it has, where there's ch in the other languages, you have sh. In fact, the language itself is called, by the speakers, they call it Cinyiha, but I'm thinking that the influence of the other neighboring languages, which has chi, and the imposition of orthography, has put chi, while they themselves will call it she, Cinyiha. So this is a major difference between that and this language and the other languages. But in my next slide, you see that Cinyiha, in terms of the sounds, is similar to Lambia and Chitumbuka in that it has similar sets of sounds. So although Cinyiha does not have the sound ch, which is apparent in the other two languages, most of the sounds that are in Chilambia and Chitumbuka are there. It differs though from Chisukwa and Chindali in that Cinyiha, just like Chilambia, has voicing of contrast for obstruents, while Chisukwa and Chindali do not have voicing of consonants. So in Cinyiha, you'll find both f and z, f and v, or p and b, while in Chisukwa and Chindali, you only have the voiceless counterparts of these sounds. So that's the major difference. Cinyiha is similar to Chilambia and Chitumbuka in that it has all these voicing contrasts, while Chisukwa and Chindali do not have voicing unless in certain environments. In terms of phonological processes, I'll look at several processes that happen. Processes that I've included in the discussion include those occurring in a nasal and consonant environment, which I call the NC environment. And in this case, I'll be looking at hardening of continuants to stops. There are several of them. And also I'll look at postnasal stop aspiration. I'll also look at processes that involve resolving onsetless syllables. And again, I'll look at these in relation to the neighboring languages. So the issue of phonological processes in nasal and consonant environments, or NC environment, is not new. Several scholars have talked about this. You have Nguga 2000, Kula 2002, Tlale 2005, Oden 2014, and Mtenje 2016, who have discussed several segmental processes in nasal consonant environments. And some of these include homogenic nasal assimilation, postnasal stop voicing, consonant hardening, nasal stop aspiration, postnasal stop devoicing, postnasal deletion, nasal degemination, and nasal deletion, just to mention a few. So these are common processes that happen in the environment where you have a nasal and the following consonant. For Cinyiha, processes that we'll discuss in this environment include the hardening processes of continuants to stops, and also, as I said, postnasal stop aspiration. And the hardening of the continuants, you have the hardening of the sound h to k, the sound u to d, the sound w to b. And we'll start with the hardening processes of continuants to stops. And in this case, starting with the change of the sound h to k when it is preceded by a nasal. So if you look at the data there, you see that where you have her in the underlying representation, the her in this case is referring to the past habitual marker. So this is the marker for past habitual tense. But so you can see that it's being seen in uhangwelaga, you used to drink, to ha telehaha, we used to drink. So that is appearing properly. But when it is preceded by a nasal, when you have a nasal, then the tense marker, and then the verb, if you see in the underlying representations, you see that the h changes to a k. So you have nkangwelaga, nkatelegaga, I used to cook, where you see that the h has changed to a k. And this is because of the influence of the nasal. So that's one of the hardening processes that happen in Cinyiha. You also have another process of hardening L to D. So a sound like L, which is the distant future marker, in the underlying representation where you did not have a preceding nasal like ulinza, you see that there is a L. Uli teleha, you cook, the L is there. Tulingwela, the L is there. But when you bring in the first person subject marker, the nasal, the L will change into a D. So in the data for I will come, it becomes now Ndinza or Ningwela, where the D has changed from the L. The same thing in the last example where you have Nditeleha, where you have the L that has changed to a D. So that's another, that's a process there of hardening of the sound L to a D. Further processes of the same of hardening L to D can be seen in the change of nouns in the class system. So the class, noun class marker for class 11 is Lu, which has a L. But when the noun stem goes into class 10, which has a nasal, the L in the noun stem changes to a D. So for example, in the first example here, you have ululimi, meaning tongue, which is in class 11. But when you say plural, which has a nasal as the class prefix, it changes to indim. Ululevu, it changes to indefu, where the levu, the L in levu changes to D. These other examples, uluwele and uluwako, are also examples of hardening, part of another process where the V sound, the bilabial fricative, is changing into a B, a stop. So again, this is a hardening process that has come about because of the change, the assignment into class. So the Lu, the same example, so I'll just skip this slide. In Cinyiha is that of postnasal stop line. Okay, the other process that...
It seems there was a brief connection problem, but now it's back. At least I couldn't hear you for like 30 seconds or so from the previous slide.
Oh, okay, because I noticed that it said that it was unstable. So I think I really went offline a bit. So I was...
Yeah, so if you just repeat the, yeah, I think that would be great.
Yeah, all right. I was just still explaining the hardening process of L to D being shown in the nouns. So you have ululimi, which Lu is the class marker for class 11, but Lu in lumi, changes to D when it's plural for tongues, indimi, because of the nasal in class 10. So now it becomes indimi. The same thing happens in ululevu, where you have Lu again in class 11, and then when it's in class 10 for plural, the L changes to D and it becomes indefu. The other examples below here are of another process or hardening process, which is of the bilabial fricative V, which changes to B when it is preceded by nasal. So again, in the class 11, you have Lu, uluwele, that changes to b when it goes to class 10. So it's still a hardening process. You can see again in uluwako, if it goes to calabashes in class 10, the b changes, the b changes to a b because of the nasal. Then I was saying that another process that is common in Cinyiha is postnasal stop aspiration. And this process involves the aspiration of the voiceless stop voiceless stops per to k into they get aspirated when they are preceded by a nasal. So you see that all forms where there is a nasal and a voiceless stop, there will be an aspiration. So for example, in Kwapa, in Tamil, in Pali for polygamy, in Kama for milk, even when you are putting together the first person singular marker and the tense marker in Kwizanga, there is also postnasal stop aspiration. So this is a common process in Cinyiha. So if I'm to compare this with the neighboring languages, you see that Chisukwa, Chindali, and Chilambia have most of these processes of hardening where continuants will change into stops. So for example, in Chindali, you also have the same words, lulimi, turning to indimi, tongues, uluwazo, for rib, turning to imbazo, ribs, for all, where you see a v changing into a b. So these hardening processes are also prevalent in Chisukwa, Chindali, and Chilambia. However, Cinyiha shows further similarities with Chilambia and Chitumbuka in that these three languages all exhibit postnasal stop aspiration, while in that same environment where you have a voiceless stop with a nasal, Chisukwa and Chindali will have postnasal stop voicing. So Cinyiha, Chilambia, and Chitumbuka will have postnasal stop aspiration, while in the same environment where you have a voiceless stop preceded by a nasal, Chisukwa and Chindali would rather voice the stop. So you see that you have postnasal stop voicing in Chisukwa and Chindali, but in Cinyiha, Chilambia, and Chitumbuka, you have postnasal stop aspiration. There's another process that is similar in that you can see in Chindali and Chisukwa, where you delete the nasal when you have a nasal and a fricative. But this does not happen in Cinyiha, Chilambia, and Chitumbuka. So if you see the examples that I'm showing now, in Zota is star, you have the nasal and the fricative appearing, or in single, you have the nasal n and the fricatives appearing. In Chitumbuka Mvula, you have the nasal and the fricative v appearing. Again, in Chilambia, in Mvula, in Swi, you have a nasal m and the fricative v, a nasal n and the fricative s all appearing. So that happens in these three languages, Cinyiha, Chilambia, and Chitumbuka. In Chisukwa and Chindali, that's not the case. When you have such instances where you have a fricative and a nasal, the fricative is deleted. Sorry, the nasal is deleted. So for example, this should have been the UR, not the PR. So the UR is here, you have a nasal and a fricative, but then you will delete the nasal, and then you have isofu for elephant, ifu for hippo, and not invu as would have happened in Chilambia, or insomi in Chilambia, but in Chindali you have isomi. So in Chisukwa and Chindali, you delete the nasal when it is followed by a fricative, while that does not happen in Chisukwa and Cinyiha, Chilambia, and Chitumbuka. Apart from the processes that happen in nasal consonant environments, I would also, apart from the processes that are happening in the environment of nasal consonant sequences, I would also like to explain some of the processes that are there to resolve onsetless syllables. So onsetless syllables are some things that are dispreferred in most languages. So there are several processes that will happen to make sure that the onset is, every syllable has an onset. And some of these are glide insertion, which is a very prominent process in Cinyiha. So you see in the data here that you have imilila with these are vowel initial verbs, but in Cinyiha, all the vowel initial verbs will always have a glide year. Imilila, yivwa, yenya, yihala, yumila, yoholela, all these will have a year. And it doesn't matter which it matters the type of glide that comes in, and it's always the year. Whether it's in some languages, they might insert a glide according to the following vowel. So you have round vowels with the w, but in Cinyiha, you always have the year, which is the preferred glide to insert. So all the vowels here will have, all the vowel initial vowels, vowel initial verbs will occur with a glide. In Chisukwa, Chindali, Chilambia, and Tumbuka, the onset requirement might be violated. So you have instances where people will say enda, onganya in Chisukwa and Chindali, Otela in Chisukwa, Chindali, and Chilambia, where you don't have to insert an onset. They can appear without onset. While in Chilambia, in Cinyiha, this is a very important requirement that needs to be respected. You have other processes too that resolve onsetless syllables, and I'll quickly look at them in terms of reduplication. So if you see in reduplicated forms, you have mata here. I'll look at the infinitive, mata, ukumata to mold, naga to destroy, ukunanga to, naga to destroy, and ukunaga to destroy. When there are hiatus context, meaning that now one onset to, another syllable will start with without an onset, U changes into a glide when the following vowel is rounded, and U is deleted when the following vowel is, U changes to a glide when the following vowel is unrounded, and U is deleted when the following vowel is rounded. So that's what happens when it's a hiatus context, because a hiatus context is also a situation where onsetless syllables are made. So when this happens, as I said, a glide might be formed if the other vowel is unrounded, and if the other vowel is rounded, then deletion will take place. So you have, for example, ukwimilila, where the U changes to a glide, ukwiva, the U changes to a glide, ukwihala, again, the U changes to a glide. When there's a rounded vowel, then you have ukogopa, where the U is deleted, or ukotela, where the U in the infinitive is deleted. Ukosha, again, you have the U in the infinitive deleted. So U resyllabifies in onset for verbs starting with unrounded vowels, and it deletes in verbs like otela or onka, as we have seen, when the following vowel is rounded. So processes, again, of deletion, glide formation, and insertion also
It looks like we might actually have momentarily lost our speaker. So let's see if she's able to join again. Obviously, there were a few connectivity issues. There we go. We lost you briefly, Atikonda.
Okay.
I see
I
you back.
noticed.
No problem at all.
Okay.
Do you want to just pick up from the slide wherever you were?
Okay. Can you see the slides?
Slides we can see. Yeah, I think. I think you'll just have to start somewhere.
Sorry about that.
No problem. No problem.
Yeah, so just saying that similar processes of deletion, glide formation also occur in the other languages. So Chisukwa, Chindali, and Chilambia, and this has been reported in Mtenje 2016, Mtenje-Mkochi, and Mtenje 2018. The last part that I wanted to discuss in terms of onsetless syllables is the copying of prefixes in order to deal with onsetless syllables. So most of the reduplicated forms copy features of the verb stem. So Mkochi 2019, Downing 1998, 2000, Oden and Oden 1985 have given reference to all these. So in Cinyiha too, you see that the reduplicant copies features of the verb stem. So for example, if you have a reduplicated form, mukunaga, naga, this reduplicant is nangaka here. And you see that all the prefixes mu, ku are not copied in the verb stem. Mataga, mataga is the reduplicant, and the reduplicant only copies the verb stem mataga. And ha, which are prefixes, the prefix for she or he, and ha is the prefix for the past habitual marker, is left out in the reduplication process. In vowel initial verbs, however, prefixal material is copied. So vowel initial verbs present a situation where they are without onsets, and this does not go well with the language. So for example, imilila is the verb and it starts with a vowel. Ukwimilila, when you are reduplicating, you remember we had the u, which changed to a wu in glide formation. When you are reduplicating, you will reduplicate together with the infinitive ku. So ukwimilila will become ukwimilila, kwimilila, to stand repeatedly. Ukwenya with the prefix k, v, will also occur as ukwenya, kwenya with the prefix. This is done so that the enya, which starts with a vowel, should not be onsetless. Ukosha, the k is part of the prefix. You see that it will be reduplicated too, and you have ukosha, kosha. So that's what happens in reduplication in terms of trying to make sure that the syllables do not have onsets. So that's what happens in Chindali. Even in tense verbs, for example, the other examples that I was giving were in infinitives. But if you have tensed verbs, wahihalaga, you still have the he, which is part of the prefix being reduplicated, like in wahihalaga, hihalaga. The h here is a prefix. Aliyumila, the li is the tense marker, which in normal circumstances should not be reduplicated but here it is reduplicated. No, this is an example of insertion. So this is not supposed to be here. That's fine. So disregard this example. But here I was just trying to show you that prefixes are reduplicated in onsetless syllables so that they fill up or respond or to the onset condition that is required in Cinyiha. So in other languages too, in Chisukwa, Chindali, and Chilambia, this happens too, that they will still copy prefixes even in order to satisfy onset conditions. So this is similar across the languages. So far, what we have been looking at is trying to see where there are differences and where there are similarities. And I've been saying that most of the times when I look at the data, I'll see that Cinyiha has a lot of similarities with Chilambia than with Chisukwa and Chindali, and it also has some similarities with Chitumbuka. So it is phonologically, that is, it's similar to Chilambia than with Chisukwa and Chindali. If you look at the history of the languages, you see that there is maybe some explanation to some of this, apart from them being in contact, but the contact comes in from a historical perspective. And there's a quote here that I took from Piri, Kalinga, and Bila, who are historians, who kind of explained the relationship. So they say Chilambia and the language of Kameme, the language of Kameme here, meaning Cinyiha, are dialects of the indigenous Nyiha. Kiangonde and Kinyakyusa are dialects of the Nguluwe people's language. Sorry. So in other words, the Maulambia and the Kameme and their followers were assimilated linguistically, while in Ungonde and Kinyakyusa, the indigenous people were assimilated by the immigrants. Modern Chisukwa is a dialect of Ndali, and it's understood by the Nyiha speakers. So it's considered as Chisukwa, forming a bridge between the Nyiha and the Ngonde languages. What they're trying to say is that Lambia, who were part of the Nguluwe group, were assimilated linguistically by the Nyiha when they founded the Ulambia kingdom. So the Lambia founded the Ulambia kingdom, but when they came from other areas, they found the Nyiha already there. So the linguistic analysis shows this relationship that they found the Ulambia people, the Lambia found the Nyiha people there. And indeed, when they found them at that time, the Nyiha were more in number. So they had numerical advantage. And this numerical advantage could have had an influence on some of the aspects on Chilambia. So that's why you see some similarities that are there. And some of the similarities, as we have said, are the voice obstruents that can appear both in Cinyiha and Chilambia and not in Chindali and Chisukwa. Postnasal stop voicing in Chisukwa and Chindali, and postnasal stop aspiration in Cinyiha and Chilambia. While it's not, so these are some of the similarities that are there. We also saw Chisukwa and Chindali delete nasals in a nasal fricative sequence, while Cinyiha and Chilambia did not have this process. They kept the sounds like that. So this could be the explanation that when the Lambias came, they found the Nyihas, they had numerical strength, and the Lambias had to build the Lambia kingdom on compromise and political control through peaceful means. But the numerical strength of the Nyihas might have had an influence on the language itself. And this is supported by Kalinga 1978, Piri et al. 1992. Asheli also mentions that sometimes in Tanzania, they think Cinyiha and Chilambia could be varieties of the same language. In terms of Chitumbuka, it's not as glaring as it was with Chilambia, the similarities, but you do see some similarities. And we have talked of postnasal stop aspiration. These were also seen in Chilambia. You also note in some of the literature and some of the discussions with the Cinyiha speakers, there is another dialect of Cinyiha, which is known as Chinyika. So Cinyiha is also known as Chinyika, and Chinyika is the variety that is used by the variety that has been heavily influenced by Chitumbuka. So they call it Chinyika, hence the name Ka. The sound Ka, it does not really appear in the other variety, and it only appears in the Chitumbuka variety because of the influence of Chitumbuka. So this influence is there. And then also I've talked about the use of ch and not sh in the orthography of Cinyiha as being an influence of the neighboring languages, and the impact that Chitumbuka might have on Cinyiha is because maybe of the numerical, again, strength of Chitumbuka at the moment, and also the social status that Chitumbuka has. As I said, Chitumbuka is the lingua franca of the northern region, and most people, some people who speak Cinyiha also speak Chitumbuka. To conclude, we have discussed the sounds of Cinyiha, phonological processes, and the linguistic relationship of Cinyiha with Chilambia, Chisukwa, Chindali, and Chitumbuka. And I've argued so far that Cinyiha shares some sounds and phonological processes, especially with Chilambia, although there are certain unique features of Cinyiha, for example, the insistence of an onset in vowel initial verbs, certain sounds that are only there in Cinyiha, and also other things. Chitumbuka, I've briefly said that if there are any other influences, it could be because of the lingua franca status of the language. And the closeness of Chilambia is because of that historical relationship that they had when they were moving in from Tanzania into Malawi, where Chilambia found the Nyihas and had an influence. The Nyihas had an influence on Chilambia in terms of more numerical and political strength. I think I can stop here. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you very, very much. You're getting a digital applause as well. So yeah, fantastic and fantastically timed. So we have time for questions or comments. If people want to write a question in the chat, then I can perhaps read that out loud. You can also put up a digital hand or unmute yourself and let us know that you have a question. So do we have questions for our speaker? I at least see, yeah, Christina, would you like to start? I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sure, I can start. Thanks. So I was wondering, so you mentioned that there is some literature on Tanzanian varieties also. I don't remember now if that, I think I have looked at that at some point when I was interested in FIPA, but I was wondering if you have comparable data to your own, how similar or different they are, because I think the Tanzanian variety is spoken quite far from the border, right? So they are spoken in somewhat different, I mean, not that far, but not immediately by the border, right? So I think the context could be quite different. So I was curious if you see that in anything you've looked at so far.
So far, I'm yet to do more analysis, but so far, well, the thing that I noticed was that was glaring was the presence of the sound ch in the data for Cinyiha of the Tanzanian variety, which you don't find in the Malawian variety. The Malawian variety always has the sh sound, but in the Tanzanian one, could see what even in the inventory that they had, they had the sound chi appearing there as something that is there. But I'm interested to see some tonal patterns, if there are some differences or similarities there. Some of the processes that I've talked about here have not yet been adequately explained in the Tanzanian variety. For example, the hiatus ones, the hiatus ones, the onset ones have not been discussed in the literature that I have on Cinyiha. But those are some of the things that I would like really to see. As you say, the border is quite far, so maybe there could be other influences too.
Sorry, if I can just follow up briefly. I think we should have enough time. This might be a stupid question. I'm not a phonologist, right? But so there is Labrussi's work, right, on this region, and maybe some other people who've picked up on that, on spirantization. So is the ch difference linked to that, and the vowel shifts that is supposed to be linked to?
Yeah, it could be. I've discussed spirantalization in Chisukwa, Chindali, and Chilambia in one of my papers. Again, this is something that I need to see the spirantization process exactly in Cinyiha and how it relates to all this. So it could be something that also, yeah, might contribute to that. So thank you for actually pointing out that yeah, that's something that I need to look into.
Fantastic. I think we have a question from Stephen Dingo Kumba Binza, is it? Would you like to? Yes.
Yes, Hannah, thank you. Just Steve will just be fine. Atikonda, thank you for the presentation. Unfortunately, I came a bit late, I think 2 or 3 minutes late. So you might have mentioned it because I missed to know whether, in which GAFIS group these languages are actually, these languages belong to, and if they do have any relationship with Chivenda, which is spoken here in South Africa, and which is the only language of that group in South Africa. So I don't know whether you mentioned that, and if you can please repeat, and that will be my first question.
So this one is in M23.
Okay.
Cinyiha is M23. I'm not sure Venda. Venda is what?
Chivenda, it's I think it's S. I'm not so sure anymore. Yeah, because I don't work on Chivenda. Yeah.
Yes.
But I know it's the only, it doesn't have any, it's not like the Nguni languages, where there are 4 Nguni languages in South Africa and 3 Sotho languages in South Africa, but the Chivenda and Sitsonga, first of all, they do not relate in terms of the GAFIS groups, and also they don't relate with the Ngunis and the Sothos. Okay. Now, my second question is about the hardening process, Atikonda. I was just wondering whether, I know it's usually the common process, the common term used, like hardening, but I should say that I personally don't like it that much, because I think that there can be a feature, it's like a term that may come from the feature that we see. It's like palatalization, that we see palatalization, we see let's say a non-palatal consonant becoming a palatal. And then, so that's what I would like to see. Unfortunately, I don't have myself, I couldn't look at the data, that you showed, it was a bit quick. I saw that there is a le that becomes a de very often. So then, then here it's a lateral becoming an occlusive. So there must be a feature there that we can identify, that we can, for which that can be the actually the right process to name, instead of just saying hardening. Hardening, I think it's too generic. Yeah, I think it's a bit too generic to just say hardening. So if you can look at the feature that is there, I think we also mentioned some fricatives becoming occlusive as well. I don't know if you can just quickly look at that. Get back the slide and try to see if there is a specific feature that we can identify. Thank you. That's my second last question.
Okay. Yeah, I think hardening is also, as you're saying, it's very generic, like it's good. Maybe, as it says, it refers to a group of of processes doing a somehow similar thing, but maybe for the more specific ones, we could try to take out the features that are going through the change. I've seen somewhere, and I think even somewhere I've even mentioned that continuance changing to stops. That was another term that I mentioned. But yes, it's very general just to say hardening. Maybe we can have particular names for the processes that are there, but this was just to mention all the groups the processes that are similar or do a particular thing. But I think I get your point.
Thank you.
Do we have other questions? Anyone else want to ask a question? Yeah, Bitum Saka.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Atikonda, for the presentation. You are saying that in Cinyiha, you don't have the sound chi, but we recognize this language by the name chi. So you have found this in the literature, that the language is named as Cinyiha, and you're also using Cinyiha. Why can't you introduce a change that you identify the language by the sounds that the language chooses? Because if they don't have this sound in the language, it is not proper for us to name the language by a sound that the language doesn't have. Thank you.
Yeah, you are so right, that we are kind of imposing something that we are using for the majority, or the, what do you call this, the stronger languages, for lack of a better word, like Chichewa, Chitumbuka, where there is the ch, and then we're imposing that on them, on this language. So it's something that we have to work with the language, the linguists there, to really call it by the actual name. In Tanzania, actually, when I was reading the literature by Asheli, he used the Cinyiha as the term for the language. So we could do that. Even in Peter, you see in Malawi, even Lomwe, the Lomwes themselves, they have kind of changed now, but it's also not Chilomwe. It was supposed to be something else, but we are kind of imposing certain things on the people themselves. So if they say it themselves that no, the language is Cinyiha, and they wanted it to be called that, the ones that I spoke to. So maybe we could make a case for such languages that write them by the appropriate prefix or the appropriate sound. So that's a good thing to note. Even the augment. So we kind of take it out when we are writing for these languages. So we say Chisukwa, Chindali, but themselves they'll say Ichindali, Ishinyiha with the augment, although that's also debatable. In some cases, you see the augment being dropped in the data for the people.
Interesting. Yeah, the Elomwe one, as you're pointing it out, they now actually, if you say Chilomwe, some people say, no, it's Elomwe. So the change is possible. We can also initiate this change in the way we identify the other languages. Just an extension on that one. So the chi is not found in all environments, or not just the word initial or word final. You completely don't find it in the language.
I didn't find it. I didn't find it so far in any environment. Wherever there is a chi, they will put the sh.
Wow.
Maybe when there's a nasal, because a lot of things happen with nasal, would like to see what would what would happen bring in a situation with a certain environment to see whether if there will be a change. But I haven't found it so far.
Yeah, it is interesting. I'm just doing a corpus analysis of the most frequent sounds in Chichewa and Tumbuka, and these are some of the sounds that they are most frequent. And their absence in Cinyiha is also telling us something very, very critical about the relationship between Cinyiha and the Cinyiha and the Chitumbuka, for example.
Was there a Steve? Did you put your hand back up? Did you have another question, comment?
Yes, it's not a question, just a comment. I mean, a follow-up comment on Peter's question about the name of the language. I mean, when I look at the situation in Gabon as well, I think sometimes the minor language name or glossonym will kind of change due to the influence of surrounding languages. I think that's what's happening. Like in Gabon, there is a minority language called Ebongwe. That's the real name in the language. It's called Ebongwe, but which is Gafi's B30 group of languages. And then all the surrounding languages like Yipunu, Yisangu, all these languages are actually B40 of Gafi's classification. And they start, the prefix in these languages is yi. And so then most people around, and including the Bongwe themselves, now they tend to call their language as Yibongwe, which is supposed to be actually Ebongwe. And that's happened for Ebongwe. It's the same with another language there also in Gabon, which is called Gisir. In their mother tongue, they call it Gisir. But because of the influence of Yipunu, Yisangu, so now people tend to call it Yisir. And that sound is actually a kind of going away from the actual pronunciation of a glossonym. So that's what I wanted just to, I think it's due to the environment. Yeah. That's what I just wanted to add. Thank you, Hannah.
Fantastic. Well, I think maybe we should end the formal part of the presentation. So to thank our speaker again for a fantastic talk. And yeah, I think there's lots more questions and discussion that we could have. And yeah, thank you all for coming. I'm going to also stop the